Bueno, muy buenas tardes a todos los que se conectan. Hoy tenemos un reencuentro en vivo con una invitada muy especial. Su nombre es Kathy. Hoy vamos a hablarlo en inglés. Eh, Ese es su idioma natal. Entonces, vamos a quien sea, quien se pueda conectar y ayudarme a hacer traducciones mientras vamos hablando, lo agradezco. Igual voy a tratar de mediar mucho. eh, y tratar de traducir algunas partes si me es posible. Entonces, ahí se conecta Evelyn, bienvenida Jen, Libre. Eh, Evelyn, pido ayuda porque el en vivo va a ser en inglés, entonces quien nos ayude a ir traduciendo lo que se pueda sería muy bueno para que podamos interactuar y romper cualquier barrera que haya por el idioma. En la misma invitación a Claudia y nos van diciendo por ahí cuando se vaya conectando más gente. Ya voy a invitar a Kathy a que se conecte con nosotros y arrancamos este reencuentro en vivo que la estoy buscando, ella ya está, me dice que no se puede unir, le voy a escribir. Eh, Aquí ya le estoy escribiendo porque parece que está conectada desde el computador. Kathy, if you can hear me now, um, it seems like I cannot invite you. Are you logged in from a computer? If you are, can you log in from a cell phone? Esperemos. Aquí ya viene. Hola, hola Kathy, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien, gracias.
This is a very special day for us. I was telling people that this conversation is going to be in English. Um, that anyone who feels like translating anything through comments, they may be um, welcome to do it. They're very welcome to do it for those who do not speak English. I'm going to try to do my best also because of the nature, and you know what we've been doing is in Spanish, then I'll try to make myself understood as much as I can so we can flow naturally. So welcome to this live session, and thank you so very much for accepting this invitation. This doesn't have a plan, this doesn't have a structure, so but I do always start by asking a question even before you introduce yourself. So, and here we go. I've been saying that I believe that we, all human beings, are here on earth to remember, to love, and to be happy. And how do you resonate with those words?
First of all, welcome everybody. Lo siento, no puedo hablar en español porque no es muy bueno. Entiendo mucho, pero en este momento es mejor si hablo en inglés. Three words. You said remember,
Love and be happy.
and be happy. Remember, I'm not sure. That one doesn't come to mind as quickly as the other two. I think happiness is important, but I think it can be overrated. I think, or maybe misunderstood. I tend to think contentment might be a better word than happiness. Happiness seems fleeting, but a certain kind of satisfaction or okayness with who you are in the world and your place in the world seems better than the word happy. Happy has too many pop cultural connotations. Um, I think everything we do, if we're content and we know who we are, we do with love in mind. And remember, I guess, I think when I think remember people and places and the things that got you where you are, your ancestors, that kind of thing.
Okay. So let me tell you a few things about these re-encounters. And this is part of, of a movement that just started a few months ago. and this is what we call in Spanish "UnDíaALaVez," or in English it would be "one day at a time." So one day at a time is a space that is a pedagogical space, and we want to re-evolutionate the world with love and compassion. And we claim to live a pedagogy of love um, through arts also. We use arts in everything we do, and then we facilitate conscious or aware processes of like whole education. I don't know if I can say like that. Here we go with the words. We just want to have a big network of hearts who are willing to transform lives and to build happiness or contentment individually and collectively, as I said before, one day at a time. So this is part of it. So this is a series of conversations that have been happening, and we are trying to imagine and have a joint construction of what we want to call a pedagogy of love. So how would you, before we go into subject matter, I want to say that this is not going to be a conversation for any kind of arguments. We're just going to listen to each other or maybe one another if there's people here resonating or sharing ideas or comments. So this is more of a space of listening,
Mm-hmm.
kindness, and listening, and all these words that will come later in the conversation. So we also state that beyond any titles or any tags that separate us, we want to have Kathy, the human being, here. So feel free to share anything, and this is how we are allowing ourselves to be who we are and just flow naturally. So having said that, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, everybody. The 8 of you who are here. I'm Kathy. I'm talking to you from rural Vermont right now, which is in the northern part of the United States, north of New York. And I'm sitting outside overlooking the mountains. And I am a professor in North Carolina. I've been a professor for 25 years. And I originally am from New York. I grew up in New York and started moving around when I was about 21. After I went to college, I studied philosophy and religion in college. And then I studied philosophy of education for my advanced degrees and have been a professor ever since. So that's probably a good enough start. I teach classes on diversity and equity and social justice, democracy, critical theory. Like Camilo, I'm very interested in issues of pedagogy, well, issues of pedagogy in general, but about relationships and purposes and values in teaching and learning. I think too often we spend too much time thinking of teaching as the transfer of information and not as the development of relationships that enable learning to happen.
So that's a perfect way to connect topic then. Thank you for sharing all this, and we celebrate that. I actually want to say that I felt that I needed to contact you and invite you for this conversation.
Where did I go?
Can you see me?
I can see you. Somehow I just disappeared.
Maybe at the bottom right, there's like two arrows. You might want. Okay.
Sorry, I'm not
So,
savvy as you.
So I wanted to say that I felt what you just said, that you go beyond transferring information, that you do care about relationships, and I felt it from the very first moment that we met, and the way that we met, and everything that has come after. So I knew that that you were a very special human being, and knowing that you are part of academia and that you are a professor, and being who you are in a world that is difficult to be like that, makes a difference for many of us that are here listening or that will listen later. So, um, how do you manage to be this loving person? How do you have you managed all these years being a professor, a researcher, and being loving and just so many of us struggle. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think so. And I think our own teaching and learning experiences and our relationships with other people are born of the relationships that we've had. I became a teacher in part because I didn't like the teachers I had. I felt so much was focused on who was going to be the best, who was the smartest. You know, we have a culture where we condition people to become good students, but not good learners. And I'll to tell you the difference. A good student is someone who pleases a teacher, who does things for grades and for achievement and for rewards and recognition. A good learner is someone who is passionate about ideas and wants to make connections and wants to uh, find joy in the world and joy in learning. And I think I didn't have enough of those teachers. And I also became early on in my educational career, probably high school and even in college, so worried about getting it right and doing well and achieving that I lost sight of what was most important about education, which is becoming a different kind of person because of what you learn. A person who's more open to the world, more humble, less judgmental, who sees value in learning as a relationship, not as a competition. And so I think once you see that, when people ask me the first question, like, what do you teach? I generally say I teach students, and I mostly teach teachers and principals who are looking for advanced degrees. You know, too often we put the subject we teach first, and then when we do that, we focus on the content and not on the relationships. I don't think we can teach well if we don't know our students, if we don't know what they're passionate about, what they're interested in, what brings them joy, why they're even in the classroom. And sometimes they're just in the classroom for instrumental reasons. They want a degree. But I think that's a starting place to figure out, okay, why do you want a degree? What makes you happy, like you said? What can bring joy to your life? What are your larger goals and purposes? I mean, that's why I was interested in philosophy, because I was always interested in the questions about the meaning of life. You know, I think so many people are on this endless cycle of consumption and living for the future and not in the present. So some imagined future. So we're always working towards something. I know you know that I like John Dewey as a philosopher, and he one of the things he often said was that we only live at the time in which we live, and we shouldn't sacrifice our present for some imagined future. He was against the idea that we were always teaching kids for the next level, and yet I think that's what kids get exactly in schools now. You know, you're in elementary school and you have these worksheets you have to do, and someone says, why do I have to do these? And they say, oh, you're going to need to do this in middle school, then you're going to need to do this in high school. But there's never about living in the moment and extracting from the moment the most meaning and richness.
This is going deep. I love all this. So let us go back to these words, the three words that have us here: pedagogy of love.
Mm-hmm.
What comes to your heart and mind when you think of these three words together? Pedagogy of love.
Um,
Because I think it's connected to what
yeah,
you just said.
I'm not always sure the word love is what we mean when we use it in the context of a pedagogy of love, because I think people tend to connect it with romantic love as opposed to like eros or a love of wisdom, a love of life. And I think it can turn people off sometimes because then they think, oh, this is like touchy feely, like we're going to all stand in a circle and hold hands, and it's not going to be real learning. But I think about it when I hear pedagogy of love, I think about passion and figuring out for people who come to a learning space what gives them passion and how can we make them, all of us, find more joy in learning, find more passion. Like I feel like what's happening now in schools is that the joy of learning, the love of anything is sucked out of people's life. They leave school passionless and then consequently soulless, right? And it becomes an empty pursuit for more, a capitalist pursuit of better grades, more degrees, more credentials, and more competition, but not like something that makes your life richer.
So in that same kind of thought, we could say that a pedagogy of love would look like more a pedagogy towards happiness or contentment against competition, right?
Yeah, I think it's just something that's much more holistic, that sees learning as a human endeavor that all of us are interested in. We may be interested in learning different things, but that it's not about simply credentials.
How would this be possible in today's educational system? I mean, I can tell you a bit about Colombia, but mostly here in the US, because that's you're very familiar with, or if you're familiar with any other systems, how would this be possible?
Well, honestly, like I was just writing a little bit about how the current pandemics, I would say we're in multiple pandemics, the COVID pandemic, the, racial reckoning with histories and legacies of racial and racism and racial injustice and structural and systematic racism, white supremacy. I think they provide a lot of uncertainty for the future, but uncertainty means that there is spaces for imagination and creativity. And I could have never guessed 3 months ago that pretty much every student in the country would be taken out of school. And what that provides, I think, even though there's a little chaos and a little panic, a space for us to reimagine schools, to rethink what we want in schools. And I think even the recommendations, the health recommendations for COVID, the 6 feet apart, make us think about smaller spaces, more intimate spaces for learning. And I think we have this perfect opportunity with everything coming to a standstill to reimagine what school could be and what it could look like. And so, I mean, I think that that's what, as a philosopher of ed, that's what I do. I think about what is the purpose of this endeavor of schooling? What are the multiple purposes? And then starting with the purpose, then we think about redesigning schools. So I think there is a space for that. I think people are tired of the treadmill, of the competition, of the meaninglessness of so much of what we do. One of the things that one of my colleagues used to do in classes is he would start the first day of class, and he was teaching teachers, people who wanted to be teachers, and he would say, this is David Purple, by the way, if anybody's interested. He would say to the students, okay, I want you to take out a pen and I want you to brainstorm, what are the biggest problems facing humanity today? And people would write all kinds of things. They would, like hunger or violence or racism or environmental destruction, depending upon where you came from. One of these you might be more passionate about than others. But kids, even no matter kids or adults, they have no trouble coming up with the world's problem. And then he would say, now I want you to think about the extent to which schooling that we provide to kids and adults prepares them to deal with any of these problems. And people would be like, it would be a dramatic stop, because they would realize what we're learning in school is completely disconnected from our world. And maybe in some places more so than others, right? Like, it's hard to imagine why we're focusing on so much like advanced placement calculus classes and competition on tests when the world is falling apart. And we never, like, when we teach history in the United States, we never get to the present, right? We start with the ancient past, and then we never get to the ways in which the past shapes the current life we're living in now. So partly, I would say we have this grand opportunity to redesign schooling now, to rethink what it could look like. I mean, I've been living in Vermont now for 4 months, and this is such a great place for learning. I go hiking every day, and like in the mountains. I mean, there's no reason why small groups of kids can't be learning while hiking, for example, or while, out on a boat somewhere, figuring things out, camping in the woods, like these things where they have to rely on each other. Right now in schools, kids don't build meaningful relationships of reliance or of real connection with other students. They see other students as competitors on their path to being the top in their class. And I know I'm overgeneralizing, But I think the
Mm-hmm.
system is set up that way. The system is set up so that if you, Camilo, and I are in a class together, um, the teacher's not going to give everybody a good grade. Some people have to get bad grades. And so for the system to work, the way we have it set up, it's more capitalist than it is collaborative, or we don't really want every kid to succeed. And John Dewey said, what the best and wisest parent wants for their own child, we should want for every child. But if you talk to privileged parents, they don't really want that for every child. They want conspicuous failure. They don't say they want that, but the only way their own children's success can be dramatic and conspicuous is if it's in comparison to other people who are unsuccessful. And that's the heart of what's wrong with the system.
Let's do something. Let's have a short break and just see what people are trying to say here, because there's a lot of responses. So you can scroll up and down by
yeah, I can see them.
Looking at the comments on the screen. So if we go all the way up, I'm going to start. They say good afternoon. Let me see. There's a lot of people connecting. Claudia, Natalia, hi. Isabel, qué bueno verte por aquí. Andrés, César joined. So we got people translating.
I see some of that.
Totally identified. Reimagining. They're translating. That's what I see. Thank you. We need to reshape our idea of schools and their connection with our humanity.
I wonder, Camilo, if we can think about, sorry, there's a big truck driving on the dirt road in front of me. You can hear it. But I wonder about the notion of the re part, like reimagining or remembering or reconnecting. I think sometimes it makes us nostalgic for a past that never actually existed, right? Like, I don't think we ever had an education system that is the kind that you and I are imagining, that involves a pedagogy of love and connection. I mean, maybe in a world of apprenticeship, like when someone was, a master woodworker, and they took on students to teach them woodworking, and they taught them the joy and love of working with wood, and it was a kind of side by side. Like, I think that apprenticeship model may be the closest that we've ever had to a pedagogy that involved love. And so sometimes I think if we talk about trying to get back to something like the system is corrupted now, but the system was always a system for the elites.
That's a very nice comment, and that's very thought-provoking also. So thank you for sharing that. So it says, thank you. We need to reshape our idea of schools and their connection with our humanity. Amazing the opportunity to allow learners to engage among themselves and the surrounding environment. Yes, we need more connection with our humanity and the reality. Do you see anything there? Like, I lost it.
No, I just see some different people joining. People can ask questions too on the comments.
Yes. So I had something here, and just taking where we were at. So the system is set up for failure, for many people to fail, so others can success, and I feel that it is also set up for suffering, and not for this contentment that we mentioned at the beginning. Maybe it is designed from our fears, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is exactly the opposite of what we mean by love.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, so often when we think about redesigning the U.S. American system, and this is probably true globally, we want to compare ourselves to other countries. And I'm often like, why do we care whether students in Singapore are doing better on a physics test than students in the United States? Like, we spend so much of our energy thinking like from the time Sputnik was launched, education was about being the best, being better than. We should want, like, if there's one thing in the world that we don't want to be winners and losers, it should be education, right? We shouldn't want we should want everybody in the world to have an education, because we need everybody in the world to solve the global problems that we have. But yet we constantly want to make it who's got the best system. You know, we talk about like global competition, like it's driving innovation as opposed to driving quality down. Because anytime we think about education comparatively, then we start thinking about standardization, and we start thinking about testing so that we can prove who is the best. You know, and so it creates a climate of competition, not collaboration, globally, not just in the classroom, you know.
Many of the people that are here are professors as well, and that I saw here connected. Many of them are also researchers, and they are in the world of academia. So, how would you envision a different academia that is not based on this competition model? Because every day, more and more, we are called to compete, to be accountable, systems of accountability everywhere, and that's inherited pretty much from here, from
Well,
the UN.
I think one of the things that has to happen is the people who are in the most privileged positions have to start speaking out against the system, right? Like I see, you know, I'm a full professor. I've had tenure for many, many years. I have complete job security. I could probably not write anything ever again and I would be fine. But many people in my position spend their time policing the people who come after them. It's like academic hazing, you know. So they say, well, you know, you should write 20 articles a year because that's what I had to do. And I think you said something really important earlier, Camilo. I think so much of it is about fear, right? We fear celebrating the successes of other people, because they, in our own mind, they threaten our own livelihoods. So I think we have to start thinking about um, all of education more like scientists. The beauty of science is about collaboration. I've been thinking about this in relation to COVID, right? That the information that we're getting from scientists keeps changing, and it should, because that's the whole point of science. It's experiment. It's coming up with the best possible information for a time and then changing it when we have more information. That's not some flaw in our system. That's how the system works. But to do that, we have to work collaboratively. The last thing we need, for example, is various companies competing to find the first vaccine for COVID and then capitalizing on that monetarily. We need everybody to be working together, for example. And so I think all of education should be a whole lot more collaborative. There should be spaces, of course, for independent study and independent pursuit, but why do we spend so much time doing individual grading when learning should be a collaborative endeavor?
So, how do you see this at an individual level?
What do you mean?
Because now we're looking at this like systematically from up high, how it should start. How about if it starts from us? How would it look like?
I mean, I guess it depends on who the we is, how old we are, whether we're teachers, whether we're students. But I think one start is to start thinking about what we care about as individuals and why we care about the things that we care about and what would we want to learn. And if we don't want to learn anything, then why? What has happened to us? I used to start my undergrad teacher ed class with a class on diversity and equity and social justice. And I would say, how many of you are open the first day of class to the possibility that your fundamental beliefs about the world will be changed because of this class or any of your classes? And most people were like, I'm not open to that. And then I said, well, why are you here then? Right? Like, what does learning mean to you? And so if you're not open to that, I'm not saying your beliefs should change, but if you're not open to them changing, then you're not open to learning. And so part of it is starting to think about what, like at an individual level, what are we doing? Again, I want to go back to existential or philosophical questions. What is the purpose of what we're doing? When we start to think about things more deeply, we lose sight, I think, or we don't even know why we do certain things. So like a good example is homework. What is the purpose of homework? Right? Most teachers think, well, I have to give a lot of it. but they haven't ever thought about why they're giving homework. You know, is it just to be perceived as rigorous? Is it to ensure that kids hate school or to take away their joy time when they're playing outside? Is it to practice a skill that if they don't practice, they somehow won't learn it, right? Like, I think we get caught up in all these practices that we haven't really thought about why we're doing them.
Well, you were saying all this, and this came to my mind, and it's that we are so about our mind body. So I believe that we are a physical body, we're a mind body, and we're also a spiritual body. And when you say philosophical, I thought we are also spiritual. And then one of my questions is there room for spirituality in education? And how could we be more embracing of our humanity in all these different dimensions from an educational point of view?
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
think
saying that.
that's it's a great question. And I think too much of education is the Cartesian mind-body split. Like, we think of our students as just like minds, but not as holistic individuals who have, like, I think about, here's a good example, when you have attendance policies, you know, and you're very rigorous on your attendance policies in the classroom, and you think somehow this is going to make education better, but it doesn't take into account whole people who have children and sicknesses and work and ailments, and, you know, it prioritizes something not that important, everybody being there at all times, above understanding the various dimensions of a student's life so that you can help them best to learn. So I think one of the most important things for a pedagogy of love is to overcome that mind-body split, like you're talking about. And you do that in multiple ways. I mean, some very simple ones are to know something about your students, right? I can't stand when I see professors who don't know their students' names. If you don't know their names, you know nothing about them. And then all you think is important then is the material that you're teaching, right? So make space for more than just one's brain to enter a classroom, right? You can do that through assignments that ask people to make connections to their personal lives, through art, like you were talking about, to creative representation of what they're learning, to developing relationships. I think that mind-body connection, like you're saying, is so important. Learning is embodied, right? And yes, you can learn abstract principles in a non-embodied way, like dump them into your brain, like like the image of an empty vessel, or, cut someone's head and pour information in, but they're never going to retain any of that information in any way that's meaningful, or be able to make connections between that information and their lives if it's all at the abstract level, if they can't personalize and make connections.
I think Caesar, who's right here, he was able to read my mind somehow, and it's we have been focused on our minds a lot. And then from my personal experience in education, there's been a trend that's very, very strong about critical pedagogy and deconstructing issues of power and so forth and so on and so forth in different capacities. But for some reason, this person is saying that's why becoming so important to that's why it's becoming so important to focus on social and emotional learning. So there is work being done in these regards from a long time ago that we didn't know of. And this happened to me. I'm gonna share this this story in my class, because I was for so many years I've been learning and sharing learning experiences through critical pedagogy in different ways. And those who know me know that I've been doing critical media literacy for a while, and different all the kinds of criticals in even in the English teaching classroom. But this happened to me in one of my classes here in North Carolina. One of the lessons that I've been trying to learn myself is not to indoctrinate students towards the critical.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very difficult task for someone who is trained to criticize, to look at what is separating us in many different ways, who is included, who is not, what is embedded, what are the explicit messages, what are the hidden messages. And one of my classes, we were analyzing commercials, and I was already reading like other kinds of literature and other kinds of books, and I thought, in order for us to change the world like we say we want to transform the world into a better world where we can coexist, we should be able to feel what the others feel, and that's what we call empathy.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we should be able to want to do something about it, and that's when compassion takes place, right? So as a teacher, I thought, I want to ask my kids before I teach them anything, I want to ask them how they feel about it. And I realized they were not able to say how to express how they felt beyond good, bad, sad, happy.
Right.
Um, so, what is your take on the social emotional learning movement that is taking more and more importance here in the U.S.? And how would you see this being part of a pedagogy of love that embraces the critical perspectives as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not as familiar with the social emotional learning movement. Um, I mean, I know quite a bit about it, but I feel like sometimes the movement is about developing standards, like social emotional standards, like that we have these, checklists. I'm humble, I am listening, I'm attentive, and the people that are writing the most about social emotional learning come out of psychology, and that tends to be like a kind of fit people into boxes thing, even though we might have more progressive boxes. I mean, on the surface of it, like not the capital S, capital E, capital L social and emotional learning, because as you well know, we have now social and emotional learning standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then becomes like we're making these like measurable things as opposed to human things. But what I was thinking about when like I come out of a critical tradition too, and some of our listeners who are here who might listen later probably don't know what we mean when we say critical, right? That like or are familiar with the critical pedagogy tradition. So like to start, it's simply about asking about the nature of knowledge. Where does it come from? Why are we learning one thing, not the other? Who authored this knowledge? What are the inclusions and exclusions? What are the silences in knowledge? Where does it come from? And then critical theorists, critical pedagogues are really interested in how power operates to privilege some and silence others. And one of the challenges with when you become a critical person in the world, especially when you first start like developing criticality, most of us don't have it naturally, right? We learn it in spaces with others. We learn it through trial and error. Like think about all the people right now, all the mostly well-intended middle-class white people who are becoming woke, right? They never really thought about their own privilege before, and so now they're posting memes about Black Lives Matter, and they're um, joining movements, and they're trying to be good people. But we live in a world now of cancel culture, of calling people out, and one of the hardest things as a critical person is to maintain compassion, right? To be critical, to have moral outrage at injustice, but also to be compassionate for people who are on the path. It's because unlearning privilege and learning to be a more equitable and just and kind and compassionate and loving person, there's never a destination you get to. You're always unlearning and learning, right? You never get to be pure. You never like, I am a social justice warrior, period, right? We always are falling back on old patterns and habits. So it's always a process. And I think one of the hardest things for us to do is to balance moral outrage with compassion. And too often, critical theorists, especially Marxist white men, are kind of jerks, right? Their goal is to find the ways in which people aren't critical enough, instead of meeting people where they are and figuring out what they need to be provoked to start unlearning habits of inattention, racism, injustice, and learning new ways of being in the world, learning to listen more, to be open to things that they don't see, to take their own personal experiences out of some equations. So me as a white person living in Vermont I'm not gonna see a lot of egregious racism against people of color. I don't live in Vermont usually. I'll see it in North Carolina, but just because I don't see experiences in a certain way doesn't mean they don't exist. I am not the center of the universe. And so how you can help people keep that, passionate outrage against injustice alive, but also not have it silence or polarize. And right now, I think a lot of it polarizes, right? We want everybody to move towards that stance. We don't just want to police people who are not at that stance, or call attention and call out people in non-compassionate ways. And I think that's the problem with social media and what lots of people call cancel culture. Like when you start learning about social justice, one of your first impetuses is just to point out everyone else's problematic ways of seeing, instead of constantly keeping yourself on the hook and looking at the ways that you're complicit. Like, I never tell students that I've overcome my white privilege. I'm always complicit in white supremacy, and I always will be. And so I just have to learn to navigate that differently. And that navigation requires more compassion than we typically see among many critical theorists.
Now that you say that, and you're also highlighting the importance of going inside ourselves, transforming the self as a way to transform society as a collective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's pretty much what that should be one of the main principles of a pedagogy of love, of how we are able to see those things that separate us, but not to project our fears on others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that would take a lot of self-awareness. That would take a lot of consciousness of how we feel,
Mm-hmm.
and how our emotions are like telling us messages of what exactly we need to work on ourselves.
Right.
So that is pretty much a starting point to use these social emotional learning kind of idea, because I don't want to put it in a framework. I don't think we should frame it very much. It should be open enough so that anyone could fit, so that anyone feels welcome and embraced.
Absolutely.
But just by knowing the difference between love and fear, and how we feel when we are resonating from love, or when we're living from love versus when we're living from fear,
Mm-hmm.
just having some awareness, even this little of it, then it's like changing our glasses. That's what we have discussed in the previous conversation.
Yeah.
So look, and we also, and I want to share with you some what you just said has come in the previous conversation. So this is a generalized concern, pretty much, of those who come from a critical perspective, that we very easily tend to be critical destructive instead of a critical who co-construct that world that we want to live in.
Right.
So when we come to those realizations, that's when I personally feel that that we need room for spirituality also in education, in academia, because all these, when speak about love, then people think, oh, now education is going to be pink and everything's going to be soft, and this is not about that. I mean, being rigorous is one thing. Being rigid is a very different thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think that when you talk about love, I think there's other words that we can use if love sometimes like gets people in the wrong direction. So like humility, compassion, mindfulness. I mean, I think there's that we talked about earlier. There's a whole movement connecting critical theory with mindfulness, and that's thinking about, how do I come across to others? You said it's important, like for us to think about how we feel, and I agree. And I think we can draw tools from every discipline. Like, I didn't mean to dismiss social and emotional learning. Like, we should be borrowing from any resources that help us be more critical and mindful at the same time. But when we talk about, like, when we start to understand how we feel, I think we have to take that next step and go, why do we feel? Like, why do I feel the way I feel? Why do I feel threatened? Or why do I feel fearful? Why do I feel like someone is exaggerating their experience? And then we have that causes us to be more reflective about our own experiences, our own social conditioning, what we have and haven't been exposed to. And once we start thinking about that, we are in a position to be more humble and be more open, and to not so quickly defend ourselves. Like, when somebody says something about, like, a judgment, like, or criticizes, like criticizes our teaching or criticizes something we say, not so quickly want to, like, smooth that over and say, oh, but I didn't mean it that way. But then we take a step back and say, why is it that the other person reacted this way? Why am I reacting this way? Where do my experiences come from? How can I grow from this? But I feel like we get too caught up in wanting to be liked, and always seen as somehow pure. Like, I'm never going to screw up. I'm never going to say something racist, right? Because how could I do that? I teach about anti-racism, as opposed to recognizing in the worlds that we live in, we're all going to screw up, and owning it, apologizing, and moving on. I mean, if that's the appropriate thing to do, or just saying, wow, I hadn't thought about that way. I'm going to think about this more. I'm going to be more mindful, and doing that genuinely, not, like a lot of white people do that. They because they don't want to engage. They say they want to, like, oh, I'll think about that more, and they never come back to it. It's a way to close the conversation.
I would say then that we are pretty much on the same trend of thought. We say that emotions are messengers of our souls, and then in everything that we do, and one day at a time, in all these re-encounters that we have so far, we have focused a lot on thinking about what we feel, feeling it, where it comes from, what is it telling me about myself first, where does it come from my family, and backwards, because some people feel pain or suffer about things that others do not, right? So there's something about myself in it. So in that way, we say that we are mirrors all the time. We are mirroring ourselves and onto others. And also, something else that came to my mind is that as critical, loving, I don't know how to call it right now, in an embracing way, but I can say from a pedagogy of love perspective, we are called to be rigorous in finding those things that unites us rather than those that separate us. And that would picture a whole different possibility, like a whole bunch of possibilities for each one of us, regardless where we come from, our skin color, our profession, our fields. How do you feel about that?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that we need more kinds of coalitional politics, and not constantly figuring out why some groups are wrong, or that trump each other. I absolutely agree with that. But I think in order to do that, we have to, like, one of the prerequisites is that we have to be learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because
absolutely,
we spend so much time trying to feel safe and secure and comforted, and like assured that we're on the right side of justice. And I think when we're working in coalitional politics, we have to be more humble and have a thicker skin than that. We only learn when we're uncomfortable, right? Otherwise, we're relying on habits and on, like, thoughtless ways of being. And so I think in order to truly work across lines of difference, not only do we have to learn to listen differently, listen, like Lisa Delpit said, not just with open ears, but with open hearts and open minds, and learning to put our own belief systems on hold for a minute, even when it makes us uncomfortable. But we also have to learn to say, I can stay in that, dwell in this discomfort, and still walk in similar directions with other people. So yeah, I think I think that too often the people interpret that we have to look at the similarities first as a way to go, see, all lives matter, let's hold hands. And not to say, yes, we have to seek points of connection, but also recognize that power exists and power separates us. And so it's that
Mhm.
important fine line, just like it's the important fine line between moral outrage and compassion. Like it's always this balancing act, and we can only do that balancing when we are mindful and reflective. And like you said, think about our own positions. And I mean, not to the point of paralysis, of course. It's better to do
Mhm.
it in community with others and talking to others.
In that sense, then we are not thinking of these romantic perspectives or views of education and life and everything's happy, but it's more about we are aware and conscious of the world that we live in, and then the politics comes when we are able to make our own choices,
Right.
and at the same time being able to respect when those choices of others are not aligned with mine. So
Right.
that would take a lot of humbleness, like you just said, and that happened to me. That happened to me again, coming from this critical trend of thought in education, and I know how knowledge is power, and how knowledge empowers you to reach many different places and do things that you couldn't imagine, to the point that it could corrupt you. Uh, and to the point that you just everything that is not working, right?
Right.
And you look outside, and I said all this again because there was a point in these last 3 years that I've been here when I felt uncomfortable enough to say or to ask myself, how about if the problem is me and not the others?
Right. Right.
I was very uncomfortable, suffering many different ways. And that's when I just asked myself that question, and from that moment, everything changed.
Mm-hmm.
How about if I am the problem?
Mm-hmm. Or what is my role in the problem that I'm experiencing? Right. Yeah. And
That's the question that came to my mind, though.
mm-hmm.
But then many other possibilities started to spread out.
Mm-hmm.
And I took responsibility, and that's, I think, what I want to mean. What is my responsibility in this? And how am I being part of it? And is this what I want, or how can I transform it? And then I started making my own choices.
Right. And then I think that trusted others play a role too. When you can trust someone who is not in the same positionality as you can then be able to learn from what you feel as criticism, learn differently from it, listen differently, ask questions, as opposed to, like I said, assuming that we have to somehow be flawless. We're all flawed, right? And we're all complicit, right? And so when you have a disagreement or an argument with somebody, or in relationships, anything, you are complicit. Like it's never one person's fault, right? And
Mhm.
then one person's pure and the other person is always the problem. I mean, this is why relationships are hard, because we have to all give something and be humble. And they're not always going to work, because they're also toxic people that we should not want in our lives. There's lots of people who are unhappy with themselves, and then the way that they navigate that is by trying to pull other people down.
Look, it feels like this is a topic of conversation for many more live sessions. We have 5 minutes.
Okay.
This is 1 hour already, and I didn't feel it. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your heart and your um, knowledge with us. If anyone wants to ask any questions or make any comments, go ahead, do it now. But in the meantime, um, what would be your final remarks to close this conversation?
I don't know that I have some sort of closing words of wisdom. I think that I really appreciate what you're doing, which is trying to to create a conversation and keep it going, and to keep it going in multiple different kinds of ways, And I think this format, Instagram Live, is one way. I know you're writing and connecting with other people. I guess if anything, I think we should be open to all those possibilities, open to the possibilities of learning from the people around us in ways that we might never have imagined. And you started with like, let's move away from degrees and titles and all that stuff. And I think that's important. We need to see people as people, right? Who are on this common path together. Most people, I think, want to make the world a better place. I mean, I know that's hard to believe. I know that, like, some people would say there's no way that's what Republicans want. But I think, like, when it comes right down to it, we all want what's best for our children, for our neighbors, for our loved ones. And so we need to find ways to see each other as walking on paths together. And that's hard, you know, because it's much easier to just put people into boxes, the us versus them.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Let's make some time to read some of the comments right there. Thank you for those who were translating, for the ones who do not speak English. Thank you. Gracias a los que se quedaron a pesar de no hablar inglés. I just said that thank you to those who stayed.
En la futura voy a hablar en español, pero necesito practicar más, mucho más.
Sí.
Pero posible.
Por aquí nos dicen, we can practice together. We can write about this in Spanish also. That could be a good plan.
I'd be at third grade level.
We are very interested in theorizing, in sharing this in different ways, like you just said. We feel like we feel the responsibility of opening up academia to different ways that we may have not experienced before. So that is the reason why I asked you about this, and then that's why we're gonna post it on YouTube so other people can see it, listen to it as everything is happening and evolving. And that way we want to live a more fluent academia, and just without expectations, just living it one day at a time, and being open to all possibilities and all possible paths that these may take us.
And I think the inclusivity that you set up is so valuable, right? So many times the knowledge is considered only valuable if you exclude people from access to it. I like
you know what we mean. Yeah. Look, someone said more pedagogy of love. So maybe it's one of our responsibilities to redefine love in a way that is embracing and not so romantic. So from this conversation, we have to really be clear about what we mean by love. And that's actually one of the questions we have. How do we define love in the frame of a pedagogy of love that allows us to be embracing enough so everyone can fit, even those who make us feel uncomfortable? Because then again, that's not about them, it's about us.
And yeah, I mean, and maybe we decide at some point that love isn't the best word, right? Because it has too much baggage. But then again, every word has too much baggage. You know, I teach about democracy, and there's lots of people who just want to not talk about democracy anymore because they just feel like democracy is inherently flawed. But there's lots of words similar to love that I think if we defined it different, like I said, eros, or even agape, compassion, you know, agape. I mean, I think that the way you're using the term and we're using the term is in the more Buddhist way than in the traditional, like, Christian way of.
So let's keep our conversation about that. I'm very interested. I hope we can continue to count on you.
Absolutely.
With your voice, with your help, and it's been a pleasure, like always.
Yes, it's always good to meet you. Thank you, everybody, listen too.
Thank you, everyone. And as soon as I publish this on YouTube, I'm gonna send it to you, so you can see it and share. And if you have more people in mind that would be interested in being part of this conversation, just let me know, and we'll try to make it happen.
Perfect. Thanks, Camilo.
Hugs and kisses, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yes. Bye, everybody.
Right on time, and now it's telling me 20 seconds. I'm trying to close it.
I don't have to close it from here.
Okay, it was white. Now I see it. Bye bye, bye again.